The Tales of Dunk and Egg is a prequel series set 90 years before A Game of Thrones. Dunk is a young knight, not a fancy noble knight, but a humble travelling hedge knight. He's not very smart or skilled, but he's tall and strong and determined to do what's right. His squire is a boy called Egg, who is secretly a Targaryen prince and future king of Westeros. In their first book, The Hedge Knight, Dunk and Egg teamed up and fought against a villainous prince. For the next couple years, Dunk and Egg travelled around Westeros. They went down to Dorne, fought some pirates, and visited Egg's brother, a young Maester Aemon, at Oldtown. So now, in the second book, The Sworn Sword, Dunk and Egg are a bit older and more experienced, but they've still got a lot to learn. The Sworn Sword was adapted to a graphic novel with art by Mike S. Miller and Mike Crowell. In the previous book, Westeros enjoyed peace and prosperity in springtime, but now it's a hot, oppressive summer, and Westeros is in turmoil. 'Cause the king, Daeron Targaryen, has died in a plague, and his beloved son and heir, Baelor, tragically died in the previous book. So now Daeron's second son, Aerys, is king. And Aerys is a weak ruler. He's more interested in dusty old books than in being king. So Aerys lets his uncle, Brynden Rivers, run the kingdom. Brynden, called Bloodraven, is a Targaryen bastard with a reputation for sorcery and spying. He eventually becomes the Three-Eyed Crow, teaching magic to Bran Stark 90 years later. But in the Sworn Sword, Bloodraven is Hand of the King, ruling Westeros with an iron fist. When the plague hit King's Landing, Bloodraven had thousands of corpses piled up and burned with wildfire, and the whole city glowed green in the night. Now there are Ironborn raiding the coast and a terrible drought, and across the narrow sea, Bloodraven's half-brother Bittersteel is plotting invasion with the Blackfires after a failed rebellion 15 years ago. Meanwhile, Prince Maekar, the father of Aemon and Egg, sulks in his castle at Summerhall. So these are troubled times, and tensions are high. As a hedge knight, Dunk travels around Westeros working for whoever needs his sword. So in The Sworn Sword, he and Egg serve a knight called Eustace Osgrey, who has a bit of land and a tower called Standfast. Eustace is a sad old man who lost his family to war. 15 years ago, Eustace and his sons fought in the Blackfire Rebellion, when Bittersteel and Daemon Blackfire tried to take the throne from their half-brother King Daeron. At the Battle of the Redgrass Field, Daemon was killed in a rain of arrows from Bloodraven. Bloodraven fought a duel with Bittersteel and lost one of his eyes. Bittersteel and the surviving Blackfires fled from Westeros to rebel again later. But Eustace's sons died in this battle, and his wife committed suicide. Eustace says the death and carnage of the battle was terrible, but he also describes the beauty of the sunset over the Redgrass Field. Eustace copes with his grief and loss by focusing on the glory of the war, the brave warriors and heroic battles. When he visits his family's graves, Eustace still toasts to the true king. He also keeps relics of his family's history. Hundreds of years ago, the Osgreys were a powerful house in the Reach, and Eustace treasures these old memories. Dunk and Egg discover that Eustace's stream, the Chequy Water, has gone dry, because Eustace's neighbour, Lady Rohan Webber, built a dam upstream to take the water. Eustace's other knight, the mean-spirited Sir Bennis, attacks one of Rohan's peasants. Eustace is furious that Rohan took his water. He says Rohan is a cruel murderer with a spider's heart. Known as the Red Widow, Rohan is said to be a witch who poisoned her 4 husbands. Rohan's castle, Coldmoat, was originally an Osgrey castle. You can still see a faint Osgrey lion beneath the Webber banners. Eustace won't let the Red Widow take his water too. He wants to show his strength and pride and prove that the Chequy lion still has claws. So he orders Dunk and Bennis to rally some men and take back the stream. They get some peasants from Eustace's villages and train them to fight, and they're pretty much useless. Dunk and Egg realize that if these guys fight against the Knights of Coldmoat, they'll all die. So instead, Dunk goes to talk with Rohan, to convince her to give back their water. Dunk is a warrior who's fought against knights and pirates, but he's pretty nervous about talking to this highborn lady, Rohan. Dunk is just 19 years old, and he feels awkward around women. So Prince Egg tells Dunk how to wear some nice clothes and speak properly to the lady. At Coldmoat, Dunk meets Rohan's castellan, Sir Lucas Inchfield. He's called the Longinch because he's tall, though not as tall as Dunk. The Longinch is hostile and rude with Dunk. He tricks Dunk into thinking that some random other lady is Rohan just to fuck with him. But when Dunk meets the real Rohan, she's not what he expected. She's not an ugly old witch. Rohan is a pretty young woman with a red braid and freckles. Dunk greets her awkwardly, but Rohan's playful and witty, and they have some chemistry, and she agrees to a meeting. First, Dunk meets Septon Sefton, a drunk and flatulent priest. He learns that Rohan didn't murder her husbands, they were just older men who died of sickness, accident, and war. 2 of them died when Rohan was just a child. And now, Rohan must marry again. Because according to her father's will, Rohan only gets to keep Castle Coldmoat if she's married within the next month. But she's having trouble finding a good husband. Some men are put off by her reputation for murder, and others are intimidated by the Longinch, who is determined to marry her himself. Rohan can't get rid of the Longinch because of her father's will, but she fears he might marry her by force. There are also political rivals hoping to take Rohan's land, watching for signs of weakness. Rohan later says that as a young, unmarried female minor lord, she needs to show strength to protect her power. She knows this conflict with Eustace is a meaningless pissing contest, but if she wants to rule, she can't back down. So Rohan demands that Eustace give her Bennis so she can punish him for hurting her peasant, and she refuses to take down her dam because she needs the water for her crops and for her moat. And besides, the water is legally hers. 15 years ago, the king took the stream from the Osgreys and gave it to House Weber. Because in the Blackfire Rebellion, Eustace wasn't a loyalist fighting for King Daeron, Eustace fought for the rebel, Daemon Blackfire. Dunk discovers that the man he swore his sword to is a traitor. Dunk makes one more appeal to Rohan by bringing up Eustace's dead son, Adam, who Rohan had loved as a child. But it's a sensitive topic. Rohan blames Eustace for Adam's death in the rebellion, so she gets angry and slaps Dunk, and threatens fire and sword. Dunk and Egg go back to Eustace and ask why he joined the Blackfire rebels. He says that from his point of view, the Targaryens were the traitors, and the Blackfires were the loyalists. The Blackfires believed that King Daeron was an illegitimate bastard usurper. They complained that he was weak, and that he listened to women and to Dornishmen. But Daemon Blackfire was a powerful warrior, legitimized by his father, King Aegon IV, and given the legendary sword Blackfire, the blade of the Conqueror. Eustace fought for the side he believed in, and he says they almost won. If the Blackfires had taken the throne, they'd be called the Loyalists, and Daeron's side would be the traitors. But since they lost, Eustace lives in defeat, stripped of his lands and his family and his pride, and left only with memories. Dunk feels betrayed that Eustace misled him into thinking he was a loyalist and saying the stream was his, so he decides to leave Eustace, but in the night, Eustace's forest, called Watts Wood, burns. It seems that Rohan is carrying out a threat of fire. So Eustace and Bennis rally their peasant militia and plan to fight Rohan. Dunk doesn't want these innocent peasants to be killed, so he heroically sends the peasants home to safety and says he'll end this conflict himself. Somehow. Dunk and Egg and Eustace face off with Rohan and her men, with Rohan wearing a super cool spider-inspired outfit. Rohan and Eustace refuse to back down. Rohan wants to punish Bennis, Eustace accuses Rohan of burning the woods, which she denies. The only way to end this with the Lord's pride intact is with blood. So Rohan demands a trial by combat, and Dunk fights the Longinch. The Longinch uses a two-handed poleaxe, and both men are knocked into the stream. They beat each other up pretty bad, but in the water, Dunk kills the Longinch. Dunk is badly injured, and he actually drowns in the stream. Luckily, Rohan's maester is Ironborn and knows how to resuscitate a drowned man. And while Dunk recovers, Eustace and Rohan make peace. They bond over their memories of Eustace's son, Adam. And Eustace and Rohan get married. Not for love, but for political reasons. Because marrying Rohan makes Eustace the Lord of Coldmoat. He finally gets back his family's castle, restoring his Osgry pride. For Rohan, marrying Eustace means she gets to keep her lands, in accordance with her father's will. And since Eustace is much older than her, he'll probably die soon, leaving her to rule for herself. So it's a marriage of convenience that satisfies both Rohan and Eustace. But Dunk is bitter. It would have been nice if Rohan and Eustace made peace before Dunk nearly fucking died for them, and Rohan never visited Dunk while he recovered. Dunk and Rohan had a thing going. They were flirting. Dunk had crazy trippy sex dreams about her and everything, but she goes off and marries the old guy? To apologize, Rohan offers Dunk a beautiful, well-bred horse. But Dunk says the horse is too good for him, just like how Rohan, as a highborn lady, is too good to be with Dunk. She insists on giving him something to remember her by, so they share a passionate kiss, and he takes a lock of her hair. As Dunk and Egg ride north, a heavy rain falls. Welcome relief from this hot, troubled summer. So, the Swan Sword is not a battle of good and evil. It's about two pretty likeable characters whose pride and politics draw them into conflict, with Dunk once again putting his life on the line to protect the innocent. And one of the recurring ideas in Dunk and Egg is people not being who they seem. Egg is not a peasant boy, he's a Targaryen prince. Dunk isn't technically a knight, because he was never knighted. Eustace is not a Targaryen loyalist, he was a Blackfyre rebel. And Rohan is not an evil old witch, she's just a smart politician. She uses her reputation as a murderous Red Widow as a political tool to intimidate her rivals and protect her power. She's not a monster, but she's also not innocent or naive. Damming the Chequy water is a major dick move, even if she legally owns it, because without the water, Eustace's villagers' crops will die for the sake of Rohan's moat and her own crops. And Rohan did once drown one of Eustace's men for stealing sheep. Rohan can be ruthless and cunning. Because this conflict works out really well for her. She proves her strength by not backing down. She gets rid of the Longinch, who was a big problem for her. She gets a husband, so she'll keep Coldmoat, but Eustace is old, so she'll rule by herself. It all goes so well for her that it's almost like she planned this. Rohan says that she didn't burn Wat's wood, that it must have been a natural accident. But it's a pretty big coincidence that the fire starts just after Rohan threatened fire. She even kind of admits that one of her men might have started the fire. And this fire leads to this confrontation where Rohan demands the combat where the Longinch dies. One of the first things Rohan asks Dunk is, "Are you as strong as you appear?" Maybe she planned to use Dunk to kill the Longinch all along, and started the fire to force this conflict. Maybe it all was a trap, like the web of the spider on her sigil. Hell, maybe she did murder some of her husbands. She says she didn't love them, and it seems she'd rather rule by herself. We're told that her third husband choked on a chicken bone, and the fourth died in the plague, but maybe she really did poison them. We can't know for sure. Rohan is an ambiguous, layered character. Like any lord, she risks the lives of ordinary people for her power, and yet she's still a sympathetic character, making the best of a difficult situation. She illustrates the complex balance of power and pride and moral compromise that you need to survive in politics. And Rohan's story continues. The World of Ice and Fire history book reveals that years later, Rohan outlived Eustace and married again, and her sixth husband was Gerald Lannister, the Lord of Casterly Rock. So Rohan went from being a minor noble to the wife of one of the richest and most powerful lords in Westeros. She had 4 sons with Gerald, including Tytos Lannister, the father of Tywin Lannister, who's the father of Cersei, Jaime, and Tyrion. So Rohan is the great-grandmother of these Lannisters. Maybe they inherited her political skill, except for Jaime, and for Cersei when she's drunk. But after she had her 4th son, Rohan vanished under mysterious circumstances. What happened? Rohan's husband, Lord Gerald, is rumoured to be a murderer. It's said that he killed his niece and brother so he could be Lord of Casterly Rock. But even if that's true, those murders were for ambition. Why would Gerald murder his own beloved wife, the mother of his children? What was their relationship like, and what really happened to Rohan? Maybe Dunk and Egg were involved, because a few years after Rohan disappeared, Egg, all grown up as a knight, fought in a battle against some rebels, and 2 of Rohan's sons fought alongside him, one as Egg's squire. Egg's father, King Maekar, died in that battle, and since his eldest kids and grandkids were all either drunk or mad or nerds or Egg or dead or female, a council was called to decide who should be the next king. And they chose Egg. Egg became King Aegon Targaryen V. And part of what convinced the council to choose Egg was the words and the gold of Lord Gerald Lannister. Egg then chose Dunk to be Lord Commander of his Kingsguard. So, clearly, Gerald and Rohan and their family were somehow involved in Dunk and Egg's later lives. It sounds like there's a story there. Maybe we'll find out in a future Dunk and Egg book. The author George Martin has talked about writing 10 or 12 Dunk and Egg novellas to tell their whole life stories. So maybe one day we'll find out the fate of the Red Widow. Egg was an unusual king because he cared a lot about the common people. He gave the peasants new rights and protections and sent food to the poor and hungry. And you can see how this was influenced by his adventures with Dunk and the Swan Sword. Like, at first, Egg acts too proud to work with peasants, but Dunk teaches Egg to respect the small folk. They might not be as educated and noble as a prince like him, but the small folk are still people with their own pride and families and skills, and they deserve Egg's respect. Egg also shows prejudice against bastards. He heard that bastards are untrustworthy and born to betrayal. But Dunk points out that Dunk is probably a bastard. He grew up as an orphan in Flea Bottom, and his parents probably never married, but that doesn't make Dunk a bad person. With Eustace and Rohan, Egg gets to see both sides of a political conflict. Rohan shows Egg that rulers are not always what they seem, and a delicate balance between image and power and pride are needed to rule. Eustace rebelled against Egg's family, the Targaryens, but Egg learns why Eustace did what he did, and sees that treason and loyalty, good guys and bad guys, sometimes depend on your perspective. Egg sees the long-term aftermath of the Blackfire Rebellion, and the impact of Eustace and Rohan's small-scale conflict on the common people. It's a great lesson for a young prince to start thinking about how to be a good ruler. His adventures with Dunk ultimately make him a wiser and more compassionate king, unlike his dysfunctional brothers who grew up in luxury at King's Landing or Summerhall. And that's why Dunk insists on taking Egg on the road as a hedge knight, because even the noblest, proudest rulers should have the humility and wisdom to stay grounded, to respect the common man, and sometimes to ride in the rain on an old horse. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks to Mike S. Miller, the artist behind the graphic novel, and thanks to the patrons, including Janine Clark, Andy Chen, Nina, William, Braden Price, Trung Dong, Glenn Thrasher, and Alicia Leperati. Cheers.
How can you stop?